Hello, my Buell friends. Today is another day of working on this 2009 Buell 1125R that we are converting to a CR. Now, if you haven't checked out the other videos, this is the third one, so go ahead and check out the first two. And today we're going to keep it on by reassembling all of this mess right here. So right now let me set this down. I removed the two switches. That was pretty easy, just two electrical connectors. Removed it to kind of clean this up a bit. This is for the instrument cluster. I zip tied that to the lock cylinder just to kind of get it out of the way. Main thing that I'm trying to do is just kind of mold the wires or have them to where I can just kind of set this headlight in here and everything is for the most part where it needs to be. So this is the front brake system. Now, I am kind of worried that this cable will not be long enough, so I already undid it from its holder to kind of give it some slack. The clutch line, I think we're in better shape. It's much longer, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to have to kind of rotate this. So that's going to be, I guess, the starting point for today. I'm going to mock up the handlebars. I'm going to throw them on here, throw on my temporary top clamp. I have a used one that I'm going to use just kind of for mock up to hold the handlebars up. Get the cables routed, maybe the throttle tube and all that stuff back on there. And once I'm happy with that, throw on the headlight and then swap out to the brand new top clamp with the instrument cluster and everything on there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. This being the factory high bar kit, they make it super easy for you. They mark out where exactly the placement needs to go. And then here's my mock-up top clamp. Just kind of set it into place. And we're only going to tighten it down with 2 bolts for now. I'm going to start by rehooking up this electrical box with the headlight switch and the turn signals. Probably hard to make out on the camera and see, but down in here is a very small pin, plastic protrusion, and I believe right in here there's a hole in the handlebar where that aligns to. So we'll go ahead and put this into place, see if we can line that up. Then we just need to put in the 2 4mm Allen bolts, and they are the exact same front versus the bottom one. I wish we'd just be able to lift up this clutch perch assembly and just bolt it as is. Well, unfortunately, not going where we need it to go. Granted, you could probably stretch this out. Maybe there's some additional slack in here, but I would much rather prefer to undo this banjo bolt and simply shift this from this side left of this protrusion to the right. And I think that'll just be enough. Instead of kicking back down in here, it'll actually kick out that way, give us like the inch or so slack that we need. We'll likely need to re-bleed this, but we'll deal with that when we get to that point. So for now, I'm going to take the 14 mil and crack this thing loose. Okay, didn't lose too much fluid, but let's see if that helped out. It's not quite perfect the way it's diving back. So now I'm beginning to wonder if I need to flip this. All right, so I got that flipped. That is in much better shape. Clears perfectly. There's still a little bit of slack there. I think we'll be in good shape for that. Now, we did introduce a lot of air in the system, so there's going to be no way around it, but we're going to have to re-bleed this. Have the clutch safety switch plugged back in. Again, they make this super easy for you as far as an alignment goes. Yes, you can push it farther inwards. I like with no gap here, but then the actual lever sticks out a little bit too far. So I think eventually if I go with shorty levers, I'll bring it in, but for now, we'll match it up right there. Perch clamp, extremely simple. Lift up. Go ahead, put it in like such. We'll hold it together. And then we have the two 5mm Allen bolts with a bit of Loctite on them. I ran into my first issue, and that has to deal with this. I believe it's a clutch safety switch electrical connector here, or this electrical connector that goes into the clutch safety switch. And while the handlebars are pretty much straightforward, it fits whenever you turn to the right. There's enough slack in there. But unfortunately, when you go left, it's just not long enough. Now, I could do away with this modified electrical wire protector guy that runs in between the forks, but I do want to retain that. So what I'm opting to do is cut this and just extend it by about 4 inches. That way I can run it just the same way this electrical wire is. We'll tuck it up in there, and that'll be more than enough slack. So I'm gonna unfortunately snip this and solder a 4-inch extension in it. So whenever you're extending wires, it's not a bad idea to stagger the cuts. That way, whenever you join everything back up, if the two wires were to rub, say you had the big solder joints, you had shrink tube over top of it, but if they were to constantly rub back and forth with the typical vibration that you'd have on a bike, you can actually chafe through it, and then you can cause arcing. So staggering it is the best way possible to extend wires if you have the means to do such. It's one done. Now we just need to do the other side. Got both 4-inch extensions soldered into place. Notice that I have them staggered. Unfortunately, I didn't have the exact same color wire as this, so I just used the same black section that I did on this end. As long as it's the same thickness of wire, the same gauge, you're not going to run into any issues. It's just obviously aesthetically a little bit different, but that's no big deal. I have shrink tubing over each solder joint, as well as I will have this piece of shrink tubing over the entire thing, and then I'll slide over the original casing. So this is the biggest shrink tubing that I have right now, so hopefully it'll clear over these ends, but we'll give it a shot. Original casing that we will slide back over. So on this side with the front brake system, unfortunately I did have to do the exact same thing that I did to the clutch safety switch to the brake light switch. I had to extend it roughly 4 inches, but I think we are now good to go. Spent a little time figuring out what was the right versus the left turn signals. I'll show you what I did on that on the headlight here in a bit, but now I am good to go with attaching this clutch master cylinder, as well as the throttle tube, the kill switch, that electrical box. So I think we'll be all right. The one thing I am worried about is this brake line. I think I have enough slack temporarily to mount this up, and then I'll undo this banjo bolt and do the same thing that I did with the clutch line and flip this braided line and see how much slack we have. Hopefully enough to where I can get this line back into its original holder, but we shall see on that. Snug up the 5mm Allen bolts. Tightening it with a 4mm Allen. Took a little extra time, adjusted the cables here a bit and on the throttle bodies, but now it's nice, crisp, and it snaps right back. So I made the mistake of trying to mount this front brake master cylinder and perch assembly first, but it was just too cumbersome with these cables and everything. So I think now I'm good to remount this. So here is the headlight. I have some El Cheapo aftermarket turn signals, LEDs, and initially I was thinking about doing this, but I didn't really want to drill holes into the actual headlight. Well, this is a used headlight because you cannot get them new anymore, and the used one actually coincidentally had holes already drilled in it. So kind of took that pressure away from me since there's already holes there. So busted these out of the toolbox I've had for a number of years. I have no idea what brand they are or anything like that. I imagine they were from eBay many moons ago, but I have the turn signal wires here, the actual headlight harness. Now it's just figuring out how I need to put these wires, and normally you can kind of just smash the wires in here. Obviously you don't want them chafing on any moving components, but the biggest issue right now is going to be so you don't kink or put these throttle cables in any awkward position to where it'll affect the throttle. You don't want it sticking. I'm gonna spend some time kind of mushing these wires up, trying to figure out the best course of action for these cables to where it's a fine balancing act that the wires aren't chafing on anything and the throttle is still nice and crisp. So it's pretty simple to actually mount the headlight. There's two posts. They go into the bottom lower triple tree here. Now this is the same if it's the R or the CR, so you can retain that. It's just the upper triple that's different. So we'll put these in place, swing it up, and then there's two bolts up top. Progress has been made. I ended up connecting some of this stuff up in here. I took a couple zip ties and kind of cinched it together. Obviously, I still have this top portion to attach, but the number one revision that I ended up doing off camera was the routing of these throttle cables. Initially, I had them coming down through here, going the exact same spot where this electrical wires are, and down through there. So unfortunately, that was creating some binding depending on how you turned it. It either get better or worse. I found out it was easiest, might not be the cleanest. I mean, it's still, I guess, not too awfully terrible, but routed it through right in there, and then you can see them going through. Now they're the furthest most thing in here, meaning all this electrical stuff is kind of pushed farther back, and then the cables are more pushed forward, so it gets kind of more of a longer arc where it goes all the way down and eventually down through there to the throttle bodies. So that's one revision I made. Another revision, going to be darn near impossible to see, but way down in there where that plastic bracket is that protects the wires whenever you turn it farthest most to the left. Well, I ended up taking all this out, and I took the Dremel and I cut a little bit more of that out just to further give it some clearance, and that seems to prevent some binding, because what was happening was once I stuffed all these wires in here and I moved the handlebars back and forth, I could definitely tell there was some binding way down in there where that bracket was. So again, I just kind of removed all this stuff, took the Dremel, trimmed it back just a little bit more. I also put on these end caps that I pulled from the R handlebars, Got the turn signals hooked up. Still need to do the instrument cluster. All right, so I have some parts here. I have the original gauge cluster. I have the top clamp for the CR. I have the trim plastic bezel, brand new from the CR. These 3 rubber isolators that mount the gauge cluster to this top clamp. These I pulled from the original R fairing stay. And what we need to do is fish this through. Easier said than done. Okay, I believe like that, right? Yep, that looks good. Now we can flip this over, push in these rubber isolators. Take the instrument cluster and just push it in like such. So now you're kind of getting an idea of what this thing looks like. We have 3 washers. Take a little Loctite. And then we'll attach the 3 little 8mm bolts. So there you have it. Now we just need to inlay the sticker, but I'll wait till we actually mount this to do the sticker. Here's the stuff that I assembled and how I routed this clutch cable. Instead of going through the side where these wires go through, it's now going up through here. So it actually works out very well, and I didn't want to replace this clutch line, and really I'm hoping I don't have to replace the brake line, but fortunately I'm able to make that work. Unfortunately, it's going to require some modification to this new instrument panel bezel piece, but you can kind of see some of the pencil mark. I think I can go farthest back. But that should give us enough clearance to get around that, and then that'll all sit on here, and then I can replace this. So I'm going to modify this instrument panel, and then after that, I may save it for the next one, but I'll likely do this brake line. So everything is functioning fine. It actually works out pretty well right now, but if this cable goes behind here, then you can't go full lock to the right. So I'll eventually get to that. But for now, let's modify this panel. So this isn't going to be some overly complicated thing. It's just plastic. So I'm going to grind a bit of this away. We'll test fit it periodically, and we'll keep going until we have enough clearance. Didn't take much off, but we'll give it a test fit. And if it works, we'll clean it up. If not, we'll keep taking some of this material off. It's actually pretty darn good. It's probably going to be hard to see, but I think I'm going to clean it up just a little bit, but I definitely don't think I need to take off any more material. Alright, so now we are good to plug in the instrument cluster. Make sure the rubber grommet is over the connector perfectly fine so that no moisture or water for that matter gets in there. Time for the 4 6mm bolts that hold in this top clamp. Just double check the marks in there. That looks good. We're now good to tighten these down. Coming along. So I'm actually going to wrap up the video here for the day. There's plenty more to do, but we've definitely made a lot of progress. Again, this is the 3rd installment of converting my 09 Buell 1125R into the CR. Now this is not an overly complicated repair. Most important part being that you have all the components necessary to do this conversion. A lot of this stuff is available from, say, St. Paul Harley-Davidson or possibly other places online, but certain parts are straight up unobtainium, meaning you can't get them, like this headlight. So you will need to get some stuff used, but it's nice knowing that you can get a bunch of this stuff brand new. But on the next one, we're going to be flipping around this brake cable. Quite honestly, I'm not getting my hopes up for that working, giving us enough slack to mount back up into the original fastener there. So I'll likely just kind of peruse online for a used cable, or heck, even a brand new one, depending on the price. But we're pretty much on the home stretch. So if you like this video series, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you like quirky cars, if you like quirky motorcycles, go ahead and consider subscribing, because I have both those things. But with that being said, I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch your friends next time.